Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, a Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to Ethnically Ambiguous People Take a DNA Test by BuzzFeed Video. Now, I've seen a lot of these BuzzFeed type channel videos with the DNA testing, and they're all generally okay. They kind of do not terribly misleading things, but they really dumb it down, which is kind of expected with these. But this one's a little bit longer of a video. It's 20 minutes, and I'm hoping that they'll go a bit more in depth, and maybe they'll talk about matches and things like that. And especially with people who are ethnically ambiguous, they're probably going to have a decent mosaic of an ancestry, I'd imagine, especially if a lot of them come from, you know, the Americas. Latin America populations especially. But if this is anything like all the other BuzzFeed videos, it's going to be a 23andMe test, and they're probably going to have someone from 23andMe who does a bit of explaining with things. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's go ahead and just jump into the video.
Today, a group of us who have been mistaken
for different races our whole lives
are finally getting our DNA tested with 23andMe.
to either confirm what we know about our family history
or find out if there's actually something to all those guesses
that people have.
It will be interesting to see how much of their family history each one of them knows, and especially in the sense that they're talking about, you know, what we know about our family history. I imagine they might dive a bit deeper into here's what we expect. Now let's see what the results are, which I think is a really good way about going about these videos.
Made our whole lives.
We're gonna send in our DNA samples, and in a few weeks, we'll find out our results.
A lot of people would say that I'm from Colombia, half black, half white, and I've also been mistaken recently for Russian. That's a new one. I don't know.
People have assumed either I'm Samoan, I'm black, Italy, Israel, Brazilian, Mexican, Asian.
Native Hawaiian to Mexican, Spanish, Dominican, Indian,
I've been asked if I was black, Puerto Rican, or Cuban.
Egyptian I've gotten, Sri Lankan, Canadian, maybe because I'm just nice.
People think I'm Latino a lot, or just Mexican. I've gotten some sort of Asian, Chinese, or Korean, or Japanese. They just don't know. People just generally think I'm not white.
A lot of people think I'm Asian, specifically Filipino. Suddenly they'll be like, whoa, I didn't know you spoke Spanish. How do you know how to speak Spanish so well?
Armenian, Russian, Italian.
People often think that I'm some form of Latina. Other than that, people think that I'm mixed.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of internal struggle where I fit in exactly, because when I hang out with my Mexican family and I have this huge ass hair, like I'm one of the only people.
I think it was kind of tough as a kid. Got made fun of by white people for being Asian. Got made fun of by Asian people for being white. Got made fun of by both for looking Latino when my facial hair started growing in. And younger people like everything to be in neat little boxes.
It makes you feel a little bit alone, like you have nowhere that you belong. My mom's like a white lady, and people would ask my mother if I was adopted.
All my life, I haven't been told much about my background because my mom's white and my dad is black. They've had a lot of hardships having me and being together. I've never been really interested in knowing my background until recently. I was like, maybe I should know because I'm half my father, so I'm going to be 50% African, but I'm sure he's not fully African either. On my mom's side, maybe 27% Irish, 23% German.
Yeah, if her father is a typical African-American admixture, it'd probably be that he'd be somewhere around maybe 80% African and then 20% other, although that can vary. Sometimes it could be as low as, you know, or not low, it can be as high as, like, you know, in the 90s of African, and it sometimes can be much lower in the 70% or 60%. With African Americans, obviously, it just has to do with the history of slaves in the United States. And because of a lot of the things that happened, such as the rape of slaves, a lot of descendants have European ancestry. That's not the only reason why people who are African American have a mixture of European ancestry in there, but it is a large majority of the reason.
If I had to break down my ethnicity, it would be 50% Korean. Curious to see how much Japanese or Chinese is also mixed in there. My dad's side, I literally know nothing about the European side of my heritage. People never seem interested in the European part. I'm actually very interested in that. I think 25% Irish, 25% English.
My father.
Now, in terms of the Asian breakdown, 23andMe, and especially at this time, I think this video is like 4 or 5 years old, wasn't exactly and still isn't exactly the best place for Asian breakdowns. And there are actually Asian DNA tests, which I've done reactions to videos of people taking these DNA tests where they have a much more nuanced Asian breakdown. So things like 23 Ma Fong and Wei Gene, and then there's a few others as well that are based in Asia, some in Japan, some in China, I think. I think there might have been one I heard that was in Korea, but I'm not 100%. And they have a much more nuanced breakdown. So people with Asian ancestry that are looking for that sort of admixture to get an idea of their breakdown, something like 23andMe or the other typical American English tests, not necessarily just American, but like English-speaking world. So 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, and Ancestry, and Living DNA aren't necessarily the greatest for the Asian breakdown. So if you're looking for an Asian breakdown, check out 23 Ma Fong, Wei Jin, and possibly some others that are out there. But let's continue.
My father was born in China, came to the U.S. when he was very young, maybe around 5 or 6. So I'm pretty sure I'm 50% Chinese. My parents met in a hospital because my father was a doctor and my mother was a nurse. So my mom, her background is Italian and Polish. I know that my Italian family, their name is in the books at Ellis Island. So I'll be 25% Italian and 25% Polish.
Now, for the Ellis Island thing, it's kind of funny to hear the books. Basically, there's their names in a manifest record, or I guess by books they could be discussing like the aliens held for questioning, or the people that were held or detained for a few days for whatever reason. But that's also kind of connected to the manifest anyway.
It's Tennessee. My mom was born in New Jersey. That's as far back the history of Courtney goes. I don't think I've been told anything about my family history either. A wild guess, 30% African, maybe another 30% of some kind of European, 10% maybe South America kind of is. The last 30% unknown, because I don't even know where else would it go.
On my dad's side, we've been in America for at least 4 generations. Most of my mom's side is actually not around anymore. It's hard for us to find and get all these details at this point, at which we have so very little records of. This is a complete wild guess. Like, I have no clue. I'm probably 20% Brazilian, 15% Polish, 15% Russian, 20% Spanish, 10% African, 10% Native American, 10% of like we just don't know.
I was born in Mexico. My mom and my dad were also born in Mexico. I want to do this because I have a really strong connection with my ancestors, and I'd love to put a region, culture, skin tone to like these beings that have guided me my whole life. If I had to guess, I'd probably say 50% Mexican or Native American, 25% European, Spanish to be specific, 25% North African, Moroccan.
So both of my parents are from the northern part of Mexico. My great-grandparents were born there. Beyond that, we actually don't really know very much. From the casual Googling I've done, I know that there is a history of Asian communities moving to Mexico. There is a slight chance that I have an ancestor who might be Asian. If I were to take a guess, I'd probably say 70% indigenous Mexican, 30% from Spain or that general area, because Mexico was colonized by Spain.
It will be really interesting to see if he gets any indigenous American readings, or sorry, not indigenous American, any Asian readings, which technically indigenous American kind of falls under Asian. So that can be confusing, and I don't remember how 23andMe defined it this time. A few of them have it like Native American, Eastern Asia. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe they can find some sort of Asian ancestry, and depending on how much of a percentage he has, you can get a general idea of how far back that Asian ancestor is.
Let's do this.
So, Daniel, what do you already know or think you know about your heritage?
As far as I understand, my dad lived in Chicago, and I think his parents emigrated from the UK. I'm not actually sure. He doesn't really talk about it a lot.
Daniel, you are 51.4% East Asian and Native American.
Yeah, so just like I was saying, I got it backwards, not Native American and Eastern Asian, but East Asian and Native American. So yeah, they kind of lump that together. So makes it really difficult to figure out if you know, like the one guy, I forgot his name, that said, you know, he looks Asian, but, you know, a lot of people think he looks Asian. I thought he looked Asian, honestly. I definitely was like, yeah, maybe Filipino. But he only knows Mexican ancestry. So if he does have East Asian ancestry, but it's too general in the DNA, be hard to decipher. So.
And that breaks down into 45.5% Korean.
All right.
Good job, man.
I figured there'd be a little something there.
You are 48.5% European.
Oh, wow. All right.
46.5% is British and Irish heritage. 0.1% Ashkenazi Jewish.
Word. I feel like
They always say the 0.1%, but they never say, well, with that, it's a trace result, the confidence of it being true is extremely low. And even if it is true, we're talking about an ancestor that was born 400, 500 years ago. I mean, with 0.1%, you're looking at like, 5th, 6th, 7th great grandparent at best. Just really low.
Courtney, are you ready?
Oh, I'm nervous. Me and Allison, we're really hoping we're cousins or related in some way. It's gonna happen and we're excited, anxious.
I think she's definitely going to have a higher percentage of African than she guessed, just because in my experience, if someone has a skin tone like hers, they often have over 50% African. That's just in my experience. That doesn't mean that that is the case all the time, but just something I've noticed.
Just to know the results.
You are actually 77.1% Sub-Saharan African.
Whoa.
Wow. Of your Sub-Saharan African heritage, your DNA has 72.9% West African, 2.3% African hunter-gatherer. On top of that, you are 19.7% European, 6.8% British and Irish, recent ancestry in the United Kingdom.
We're cousins.
We're cousins.
There it is, bro.
0.5% Iberian.
That's crazy.
0.3% Scandinavian.
And then all those B stands for broadly. Broadly Northwest European, broadly Southern European, broadly European.
1.8% East Asian and Native American.
Oh, there's more.
And now, is it an Asian population or is it a Native American population?
Bring it all in. Everywhere, baby.
1.3% Southeast Asian, 0.3% Native American. Wow. Yeah. 0.1% Western Asian and North African heritage. Specifically, that 0.1% is North African and Arabian.
What?
And a serious trace result.
Genetics, I literally know nothing.
You have 50.4% East Asian and Native American. 47.9% of that is Native American, recent ancestry in Mexico.
Yeah.
Which is what you thought from knowing where your grandparents lived. 0.4% Southeast Asian ancestry.
So
Now the thing is with all this Southeast Asian, broadly East Asian, and then broadly East Asian Native American, knowing that she comes from a mostly Mexican ancestry on her whichever side, I can't remember if it was mother's father's side. My guess is all of those are just misreads of Native American Mexican. And that's one of the reasons why East Asian and Native American are lumped together, is because the correlations between the DNA is so difficult to decipher sometimes that they just have to lump it together. And that's why they even have this 1.9% broadly East Asian and Native American. They literally can't say one way or the other. Is it East Asian? Is it Native American? They just can say that it's one of those two, and more than likely the 0.4% and 0.2% aren't actually Asian, which this is one of the things about these types of videos that kind of annoys me, is that I don't know if the woman who's explaining this to them goes into this information, but at the very least BuzzFeed is cutting all this out, which I can kind of understand because they're trying to make this make it very succinct. They want to make it watchable. They want to keep people's attention. And when you go into the details, people kind of click off, which I definitely notice in my own videos.
cool.
There's also 39.2% European ancestry, 22.4% Iberian, evidence of ancestry in Spain, 0.4% Ashkenazi Jewish.
Wow, that's very...
Which is not untypical of Iberian because of the history with Sephardic Jews and the forced conversion, technically not forced conversion, but the mass conversion of Jews in Iberia because of the Inquisition, both the Spanish Inquisition and the Portuguese Inquisition.
Interesting.
0.2% Sardinian, 0.1% Scandinavian, but we still got some more. You have 2.6% Sub-Saharan African ancestry, 1.6% is West African, and then you have 0.6% Western Asian and North African DNA. Hope that makes sense.
Now, this is one of those admixture breakdowns that if Andrea wanted to do her genealogy and figure out her family tree and go, okay, I have these different breakdowns, how could I use that to help me in this? There are a few things that actually can happen with this one. For one, When it comes to the continental level, you can be very certain of those results. There's a very high confidence with those results. You can be fairly confident in terms of kind of 3 breakdowns. Everything except for that 0.6% West Asian and North African, which could be coming from the Sub-Saharan African or even the East Asian Native American, or it could be representative of something else. But with that 2.6%, that gives us a good idea of how far back we'd be able to go. And so if she was looking specifically to find out that African ancestor, then if she's able to get family members to test, especially her parents, then if both of the parents test and only one of them gets the Sub-Saharan African reading, then you can be very confident that that's the side it's coming through. And then looking through their side, you'll get a better idea. And it's very possible that if one of her parents were to test, they might get more than double the amount that she gets. Could be that one of her parents has almost 10-12% African DNA, and it just so happens that she only got 2.6% of it. And at 10 or 12%, if that's her parents, then that's going to be the equivalent of like a great-grandparent. Because basically the way it works is you get 25% of your DNA about from your grandparents, 12.5% from your greats, 6.25 from your second greats, and then just keep having it each way down. So that's why with the Sub-Saharan at 2.6, we're looking at maybe about a 3rd great-grandparent, maybe a 4th great-grandparent, or a 2nd great-grandparent as well, because with recombination, sometimes you can inherit more DNA, sometimes you might inherit less than the average expected.
I feel kind of like overwhelmed. I've always had a really strong connection with my ancestors. I often call on them, make a very conscious contact with them. To hear that I have like pretty recent ancestry that is indigenous to Mexico, even goes as far as like the other side of the world, it just makes me feel really supported. It's really cool.
Mexico actually has pretty decent records available online too. And you can do a good amount of genealogical research if you have Mexican ancestry. So if Andrea really wants to dig into her family tree, assuming that she hasn't, I mean, it's been 4 or 5 years and maybe this got her or someone in her family to do it, but that's definitely something possible. And I think even familysearch.org, which is a free website, has a lot of records, I know, at least from Jalisco, Mexico, because I've gone through a lot of those records in tracing some family trees. So that's definitely something possible for Andrea.
Like a really sad part about Mexican ancestry and Mexican culture is that a lot of records and histories have been erased. So one of those first kind of like really big steps in figuring out where all my ancestors came from and where they met.
Now the thing is that, well, this sentiment is kind of true for a lot of different populations. It's overestimated. Honestly, I find a lot of times that a lot of people that don't know their ancestry and then will say, well, we don't know because a lot of the records were destroyed. Most of the time, they just never really looked hard enough, and the records are there. You just gotta find them. For Mexico, that's something that I think is a very common sentiment I hear, but isn't quite as true as people make it think. But there are areas in Mexico that are very difficult to trace. But it's kind of a common thing, too, in like the Jewish genealogy world, where a lot of people think, oh, well, all the records were destroyed and, you know, there's really not much left. But in reality, there's a ton of stuff left. It's just not cataloged very well. And in recent years, things have been changing in some of the areas in Eastern Europe, especially, where now a lot of records that were thought lost or destroyed are coming to light and even being digitized and made available online. Yeah, there were records destroyed, there were histories lost and family histories lost in these areas, but it's often nowhere close to as bad as people think. And not saying that's not the case for her family, but I would not be surprised if there was a lot more available than she even knew about.
I'm excited to learn more.
You are, in fact, 45.6% East Asian and Native American. What that includes is 42.7% Native American with evidence of recent ancestry in Mexico.
Okay.
And then the rest of that is 41.7% European, and of that, 26.9% is Iberian, and that's, again, something like Spanish or Portuguese. In addition, you are 0.6% Balkan.
Very cool.
You also have 0.4% Ashkenazi Jewish heritage.
What up?
And then a lot of broadly,
Cousin.
a ton of broadly European.
0.1% Sardinian.
Yeah, look at that, 12.6% broadly South European, and more than likely with that South European, whatever that's coming from, which it could just be Iberian, that's just difficult to read. A lot of that, the Balkan or the Ashkenaz, it could all be tied in together. So it's, these are not surprising knowing a, mostly Mexican ancestry. I think the thing that'll be interesting to see is what is this 8 or 9% other going to be.
And heritage.
All I really knew is that my ancestors were from Mexico. There was colonization that happened there, so I knew about the Iberian and Native American.
And we're not done yet.
Oh yeah, I guess it's like about 12% left?
Oh, there's more.
So you are also 3.7% sub-Saharan African.
Okay.
That's very cool.
Wow. 2% is West African. It's actually really common for Central and South America to have a little bit of West African heritage.
Very cool. Awesome.
You also have 1.7% Western Asian and North African heritage. 1.2% North African and Arabian.
We're so related, man.
Which is not surprising with the Iberian because of the whole, Umayyad Caliphate and that, that whole history. Not very surprising. I think the Sub-Saharan was a little bit surprising, not terribly. It is true. A lot of people of Latin American ancestry have some sort of African ancestry as well in there.
Did you learn anything that you didn't know before?
A few percentages of Sub-Saharan African. It's on my bucket list to really dive deep into my ancestry. This is a really great start.
Now,
so once again, 3.7% African, that's going to equate to about a third great-grandparent or so in ancestry. So if he wants to methodically try to figure out who is that African ancestor, what he'd want to do is identify all of his great-grandparents, then identify all of his second great-grandparents, identify all the third great-grandparents, identify all the fourth great-grandparents. And by the time he gets up to his fourth great-grandparents, he's likely going to be seeing something indicating African ancestry. And I would not be surprised if he starts seeing something even a little bit closer than that, because assuming that the 3.7% is coming from one recent ancestor, which could be coming from multiple recent ancestors on both sides of his family, there is that possibility he might get to that fourth great-grandparent level and he might identify every single one of them, but then not find any evidence that any of them were African. And if that's the case, it could just be that they all had African ancestry in their distant ancestry, and so it's not a recent common ancestor, but many distant ancestors, ancestors from 600, 700 years ago, and he's got, like a dozen or, a couple of dozen scattered in that ancestry throughout his tree, but the amount of DNA that dwindles down from that distant then kind of adds up to these small percentages, which is kind of the case with a lot of people who have Iberian ancestry, and then they get those small percentages of Ashkenazi, and sometimes they'll get a little bit more, maybe a little bit over 1% or maybe even close to 2%, but most of the time when you test someone with Iberian ancestry, but most especially someone of Latin American ancestry, you're going to get these very small percentages of that Ashkenazi. All right, I'm rambling too much. Let's go.
now we're going to look at Jason's ancestry. Jason, what do you know about your heritage?
We can track back to maybe the 1500s. When it comes to before that, we just existed. I really need to know.
I mean, that's pretty damn good. We can track back to the 1500s, but before that, we pretty much... That's most family trees. Honestly, a lot of people are very lucky to get back into the 1700s and even to the 1600s. So to be able to trace that far back, that's pretty damn good.
So there's a couple twists on that. You are 80.5% European.
Jesus.
Whoa.
This is what I think might be a little bit of a surprise to you. You have 48.2% Ashkenazi
I'm not surprised. He kind of has this Jewish look to him.
Jewish DNA. So almost 50% Ashkenazi Jewish.
That's a lot.
Which is basically a question of, is one of his parents Jewish or mostly Jewish?
Whoa. My family has a long history of Judaism, but I'm also surprised that it showed up on this. We're still Jewish till this day.
17.1% Iberian.
Whoa. Okay.
Next, you have 12.7% Sub-Saharan African heritage. 11.4% is West African.
Wow. Oh, okay.
0.1% is this African hunter-gatherer heritage.
What?
There's also 4.7% East Asian and Native American, and that is almost all Native American heritage specifically. And there is evidence of recent ancestry in Brazil. So you were right about that.
Oh, this is so cool. My
Still a
family
bit
only knows
left.
it by story. It's always been passed down as like, oh, we're just our native here. But that, like, we have no proof of it. This is the confirmation of this moment. Like, this is it.
The evidence is in your DNA.
Ah, this is so cool.
So from the looks of it, assuming that the one parent is Jewish and then the other parent is everything else for the most part, unless both parents are just a big mix as well, it seems that with 12.7% sub-Saharan African, that's pretty recent. So that's going to be like the equivalent of a great-grandparent, assuming it's one recent ancestor. Now, it could be 2 second great-grandparents. It could be multiple, even more distant ancestors. But that one's pretty close. And with him saying, how much he knows about the family tree, for one, there is a question of, well, you say you have it traced back to the 1500s, but how many lines are traced back? Because some people will know, like, a lot about one line of their family and then almost nothing about all the other lines. And then they'll find out through these DNA tests of something else. And it's just because, like, oh, well, they looked at this one line, but, like, look at just breaking it down just by your great-grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents. So if you only know one line, then out of your 8 great-grandparents, which represent, 12.5% of your DNA, each of them about, then, every single one that you don't know, well, that's going to be a big amount that you're not going to know about. So I'd be curious to see in terms of his ancestry, is it one parent who's Jewish and then the other parent who's not? And I should also say, too, with this saying Ashkenazi Jewish, I don't like that wording. It should say European Jewish. And I would not be surprised if he comes from a Sephardic ancestry, especially with this mixture of the Brazilian Native American and then the, Sub-Saharan African, all that other stuff. And the Iberian, that's kind of a very typical breakdown of, Latin American ancestry. So, if both of his parents come from a mixed ancestry and they're both Jewish, then to me that kind of says that maybe they're coming from one of these Latin American Sephardic communities, which there are a lot of them. I have a lot of family who are part of them, especially in the Caribbean, and I actually have ancestors buried in Recife, Brazil. Granted, they were buried there in the 1650s when it was a Dutch colony before the Dutch left. But, there is a long history of Sephardic Jews in Latin America. The whole B'nai Nusum and crypto-Jewish thing, there are a lot of question marks with that. Not to say that it's not true, but, it might be a little overblown by some people. But, even with that, yeah, I'd be very interested to see his family tree, but this is a really interesting breakdown.
How I feel is glad to hear all of this. Actually kind of proud. My family has been able to both keep track of our history, but also maintain some of it for so long. We still practice like that heritage till today. I couldn't even tell how many generations that must have been, but we've just like known it.
We can look at the different ancestries show up throughout your genome to kind of predict when these ancestors might have lived. An ancestor of yours who was 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, this person probably is just 1 or 2 generations removed from you. So it would be a parent or grandparent that was 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, born between 1930 and 1960.
If he's acting like this, then it could be that both of his parents are very mixed. All 4 of his grandparents are very mixed, and then like if you look at a lot of his family, maybe they're just a lot of mix because they came from a community where for a few generations there was a lot of mixture going on.
What? Whoa! That's very recent.
Yes. You would know that.
So weird.
I would know them. Who is this?
What if I'm not Chinese, though? My dad's gonna kill me. But now I'm nervous, like maybe that's not true.
You've got a long list.
Welcome to the long list club, champ.
Oh my goodness. I'm like nervous. I'm gonna throw up.
Did somebody have a bucket?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Jeez.
You're
Do
just
you wanna hold
like
my hand?
in the splash zone. I'm fine.
We're sitting up here.
Good job.
I'm ready.
Let's do it. You are, in fact, exactly 50% East Asian and Native American. And of that, actually only 37.7% is identified with our algorithm as Chinese.
What? Oh
Her mind just broke. You just broke her.
At least I'm Asian, though, you guys.
3% Southeast Asian. 2.5% Manchurian and Mongolian.
What? Oh my goodness. Okay.
And then 6.6% broadly East Asian.
Well, there's more coming.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready.
We're cousins for sure.
42.5% European. Of that, 17.9% is Eastern European, evidence of recent ancestry in Poland.
Hey.
7.2% Balkan. 6.5%
Balkan's not surprising with Eastern European, honestly.
Italian. And then on top of that, you have 1% French and German.
Ooh, look at you.
This is a common point of confusion. When we say French and German, that doesn't just mean that you're thinking about like France and Germany. It kind of means the countries that are really close to them, like bordering them in that area. So that includes like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Austria. So like a bunch of countries in there.
Look at them including so much more nuanced information than just leaving it French and German. How about that?
Feeling.
I don't know, you guys.
She's not even done.
She's not even done.
Really, something like that really makes me wonder how much nuanced information did she give them that they just cut out?
Your list is long.
Man, I'm the most boring guy here.
My family's been all around, apparently.
0.6% Iberian.
Wow. Oh my
How do you
gosh.
feel?
I don't
Wait,
know.
are we even done yet?
Nope.
We're not done yet.
6.6% Western Asian and North African DNA. Most of that is Western Asian. That's something we would maybe historically have called the Middle East. It includes countries from...
Which is not terribly surprising with the Eastern European and especially getting a large amount of that Balkan. So what it could be is she might have like some sort of a Turkish or Ottoman Empire sort of ancestry. And that kind of bleeds into the Italian that she thought she had and possibly even that Polish as well. Well, I guess a lot of that Polish too. But like, you know, with her thinking 25% Polish, 25% Italian, it's making me think that she has a grandparent who was Polish, a grandparent who was Italian, and a large amount of that Eastern European and then that Balkan kind of add up to that. And then with the Italian, it's a lot of the other stuff that add together for the, you know, that Italian. But for both of those, because of the connection with the Mediterranean, as well as that close connection with the Balkans through, you know, Turkey, because technically Turkey's part in Asia, part in Europe, it all kind of flows and makes sense.
Iran, Iraq to Turkey, Syria,
Whoa.
and even places.
The Ottoman Empire. It all connect. If you look at a map too, it just makes so much sense because, you know, the Balkans are just right there. And yeah.
In the Caucasus region.
That's a lot.
Decent
That's a lot.
6% also have 0.1% sub-Saharan African heritage.
Now, even though I was discussing the whole continental thing, while that is a trace result, so there is a very low confidence with it, it is a little bit higher of a confidence than most 0.1%, but not by much, but just because it's on that continental level. But it's still kind of a really low confidence.
Courtney.
Cousins.
All right, Jazzmyne, what do you think you know, or what do you know about your heritage?
I know absolutely nothing. My dad doesn't know his father. I've never met my mom's dad. From the point of my birth, my dad's African American, my mom's white, and so it's been from that point on, this is what you're gonna deal with type of thing. Not we're gonna go back in history, but it's like this is the problems that are gonna be in front of you and this is how you face them. So I've never really thought about it that much before. I guessed, like total wild guesses. I don't know.
You do have a very long list.
Do I really?
Ooh.
You have 60.2% European ancestry.
Okay.
12.8% of that is Eastern European, 10.3% French and German,
Okay.
4.3% British and Irish with evidence of recent ancestry in the United Kingdom,
Oh.
Okay.
and then 1.6% Iberian, and again that's Spanish and Portuguese,
Okay.
1.5% Balkan.
What?
Okay.
Balkan ancestry reflect southeastern part of Europe, countries kind of bordering the Mediterranean like Greece or Albania, Serbia, Croatia, things like that.
Got it.
The former Yugoslavia.
You have 1.4% Italian ancestry,
Okay.
1.3% Scandinavian,
There's so many.
Look at that massive chunk of broadly Northwestern, broadly Southern, and broadly European.
yeah, and then that's your European heritage.
Wow.
So it sounds like she really has a large mix of European ancestry. So the side of hers that is European, which it sounds like it's one parent's European, They showed that picture. It was her mom is European, so her mom probably has a super mixed background. And I would not be surprised if it's kind of a mixture of recent immigration with deep American roots, because I find that a lot of people that have that kind of mixture of deep American roots with more recent immigration have these really big mosaics of European.
That's a lot. I never really thought into that before.
So actually what it could mean too is that she doesn't know a lot about her history, but it could be one where when she starts researching into her European side, she might find an immense amount of information.
You have 33.5% Sub-Saharan African, 28.8%, so most of it is West African, 0.9% East African, 0.3% African hunter-gatherer, and then there's still more. So
What?
you have 1.9% East Asian and Native American heritage. Third of that, or 0.6%, is Southeast Asian, which is pretty cool.
In what world?
Yeah, you got that.
Yeah, never would I have guessed that.
What's the rest?
0.2% Native American and 1.1% broadly East Asian and Native American.
Wow.
Now I wonder if this 1.9% is representative of one recent ancestor being about a third or fourth great grandparent. And with that, I think that if that's the case, that 0.2% Native American may just be a misread of what really should be more Eastern Asian.
Oh.
We're not done still. So you also have 1% Western Asian and North African DNA. 0.3% of that is Western Asian. Some people might describe as the Middle East, spanning from Iraq and Iran all the way over to Turkey and includes Lebanon and Syria. And so it could be kind of anywhere in there.
That's insane.
And then just to wrap it up, 3.4% unassigned.
That's a lot. Damn. I'm everything. The East Asian and never has that been talked about ever.
All right, so that was a pretty decent video, kind of typical BuzzFeed video. A little bit more nuanced than most of them. I did like how they had a couple of things that she said to explain things still in there, and especially kind of describing okay, well, this West Asian, that's kind of Middle East, so that represents about these areas. But I do wonder if maybe she discussed and that could also be connected to the fact that, you do have this other DNA or, for each of them, there was kind of the different things that I discussed. I think it'd be really cool to see them do something similar to this, but actually going through the family tree and not just, what do you know? Because a lot of times what people think they know is just a little bit of it and often not that correct. As someone who's a genealogist and has helped hundreds of people, especially a lot of my friends and coworkers and stuff, where just hanging around and it's well, what do you know about your family? Oh, well, I know this, I know that. You start typing stuff in, you start building a tree, and then you start disproving stuff as well as also proving stuff, and then bringing out tons of stuff that they had no clue about. My biggest hope with videos like this is that it gets the people, especially the participants, is interested enough into their genealogy that they start kind of researching it and looking into it. The one guy that had the Jewish DNA, that, the almost 50% Ashkenazi Jewish reading, which really should just say European Jewish reading, I am very curious what his known ancestry is and how much of it he truly knows. Is it just one line going back to the 1500s, which sounds like a very typical Sephardic family tree. A lot of Sephardic family trees can trace back very far in time. But, is it a Sephardic ancestry? Is it an Ashkenazi ancestry? Is it a mixture of both? And if that's the case, I do wonder if when he saw the results, and maybe they cut this out, but if he saw the results and was well, why is it Ashkenazi? I always thought it was Sephardi. Why is there no Sephardi? And, I've talked about this in a lot of videos, but with Sephardic DNA versus Ashkenazi DNA, there's not a lot of studies to be able to decipher the differences, and it is very difficult to decipher the differences because it's very difficult to even do a study, because a lot of Sephardim are very mixed these days. A lot of people that have Sephardic ancestry, such as myself, are often mixed with a lot of Ashkenazi, and even places elsewhere, there's a lot of mixture otherwise too. So to be able to do these population studies, you need to find people where all four of their grandparents are known Sephardic Jewish ancestry. And even more, you'd want each one of those grandparents to be a majority Sephardic Jewish. But if you can't find a lot of participants that are able to prove that sort of a background, it's going to be very difficult to do a study and not have to factor in all of these different things of, well, could this segment that we're identifying actually be an Ashkenazi segment? And it's just that they're sharing this because a lot of them have Ashkenazi mixture in there, and it's not necessarily Sephardic. And this is a major issue that a lot of the population groups have in general, is that there's just so much DNA shared between them, because historically, while we define these different countries, such as French and German, or these different population groups, they still have a lot of connecting DNA, just like Native American and East Asian. And then it's very difficult to decipher, and with more and more studies, it's better and easier to decipher these populations, but it requires a lot of work. And so it's just really, really difficult. Now, overall, of all of the different BuzzFeed ones that I've reacted to, I think that this is probably one of the better ones. But if you'd like to see me react to another video similar to BuzzFeed, be sure to check out this reaction right here. Thank you to my YouTube members and Patreon patrons for supporting the channel.